Hey everybody, this is your boy Brandon Collins here with another edition of Drunk Black History. This month's guest, incredibly excited to have her on. She's a hilarious comedian and storyteller, Brittany Carney.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me. I'm good.
I wanted to make sure I enunciate.
Oh, I love that. The hard T. Thank you.
Yes. So before we get to a topic for this episode, just wanted to, I always talk to people about their relationship with Black history and talk a little bit about your background, where you're from.
Totally.
And
okay.
how is Black history talked about in your family?
That's so... okay. Well, I guess where I'm from is... I spent most of my childhood in Japan. Then a little bit in Singapore. But my dad is from Philadelphia. And every summer we'd go to Philly to visit my grandma.
Wait, so you would go from Japan to Philly?
I'm serious.
That had to be a culture shock.
And Annapolis, because but I was a kid, so, and this was since I was a baby. We took these annual trips.
Got it.
But then it wasn't until I was older, young teenager, that we moved to Philly, suburbs of Philly. And so that was the first time that I was really officially in, for example, the school system, and that was a giant culture shock. I feel like as a kid, my point earlier was maybe... my dad went to this Methodist church growing up in Philadelphia. So what that meant is that when I was there as a kid with my sister, sometimes we would be just placed in the Sunday school at this church in Philly. You know what I mean? Yeah. So sure, or a Montessori camp with my cousins in Maryland. So yeah, I think in those moments I felt like I wasn't even American or something, in small kid ways.
I understand that.
But then but I was still young and it was fine. It's easier to assimilate with a group of random kids when you're younger. Yeah.
If you don't mind me asking, how'd your parents talk to you about that? Did they talk about citizenship and how that works? Or how to feel like you're American?
I don't think, actually, and I'll get to my point about this in a second. Yeah. I don't know. I don't know that they really talked to us about that more explicitly. They were kind of they were protective. For example, when I was a kid, I had a lot of friends who were half Japanese but half white and Japanese, right?
Okay.
So my mom would be protective about hair stuff. If I went swimming with friends and they would just comment on the way that my hair looked when it was wet or how it dried. Yep. She would be really protective about that, or pretty particular when it was because also Japan as a society is very about looking showing decorum and dressing well for the public, and especially for a school-related thing. Yeah. So I feel like as a kid, they didn't actually talk to us about it. They just kind of reacted or did what they could to. Not at my school, there weren't so many, but in general, there was a community of Black people that were working in Japan whose kids played with each other, small. Okay. So I had a few random Black girls that I played with that did not go to my school. They went to a different, they went to the school called the American School in Japan, and I went to this other international school. Okay. This is
crazy. This
I
is
know.
fascinating. I just want to talk about this.
But so when I was in third grade, I went to Sacred Heart Tokyo International School, and I had this teacher named not Jimi Hendrix. His name was Mr. Hendrix. I don't know what his first name was.
Jimi Hendrix would be hilarious. He didn't die. He just was in Japan teaching English.
He just moved to Japan. He's still out there.
Hey, y'all, cool cats.
So
I may look familiar to some of you, but I'm not that guy. I promise.
He teaches guitar. So I had a music teacher in third grade named Mr. Hendrix, and he and my dad befriended each other because he was the one Black. I mean, I'm sure there was other, I don't know, this is the 90s in Tokyo. I'm sure there were other Black faculty at my Irish Catholic international school, but I don't really remember, and I don't really think so. I had a music teacher, Mr. Hendrix, who was Black. He taught chorus, and he taught he did plays for the kids, elementary school and stuff. Yep. And he loved my family. He came over for dinner and stuff because we were just so
hey.
So I remember I felt very favored by him in a cute way. And he and my dad, I remember him coming over for dinner. And so my point is then, and then weirdly when I was older and we moved back to Japan, we moved to Singapore and we came back. So even when I was in 8th, 9th grade, I went to a smaller international school where similarly there was one Black teacher, and I think he was a PE teacher, I think. So anyway, he also came over to our house because my dad was the only.
Did y'all also cook sometimes soul
Well,
food
my
or anything
parents
like
are
that?
vegetarian, so actually they're really crunchy. So it's just a whole other.
They probably came over expecting to get some good home
I
American
know.
black food. And
Not from Frank Carney. No,
y'all
but
ain't got no black eyed peas. Like, well,
which
vegetarian,
I think,
baby.
yeah, I think my dad likes.
Just thinking
You
fried
know how
chicken
there's like vegetarian and vegan soul food. I think my dad's very into that because I think he
Okay.
grew up around that too, even in Philadelphia. Anyway, my point is that when I was in third grade, so Mr. I just have this memory of like a choir concert where, you know, in elementary schools, it'll be like, hey, kids, everyone in music class in third grade is going to sing these like cultural songs or whatever, right? Like it was literally, we sang Wade in the Water and dressed up as enslaved children. And this was part of this was part of a.
You're a kid. You don't know.
I don't know.
That's
and
crazy.
it was also like, I'm 36, so if I was in third grade, wait 1 second, I'm gonna do the math really quickly. I was this must have been like 97 or 6. Hang on, 88. Third grade, you're like 8 years old.
7.
I was like 7.
Yeah. So 88. So that means you would be 95,
like
96.
95, 96. So I just think that also it wasn't a time culturally where I don't feel that anybody particularly protested it, also because there were not many black parents at this school.
Yeah.
Maybe there were. I know that there were, by nature of like the business, like reasons that black people are in Japan might be for business, for example. Maybe there were like West African girls that were at our school, but I don't know. No, I don't remember. So anyway, we sang Wade in the Water, and I always remember it because he directed it, Mr. Hendricks. But I wonder if that would fly today.
No.
I don't think so.
Absolutely not.
I really don't think so.
And as a black man doing that, like there'd be a lot of questions.
I know. Isn't that true?
There'd be a lot of questions.
Should I just say his name? Oh, well. I don't know.
Now I'm curious as to why Mr. Hendricks was international by himself. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
It's like, what did you do? Like,
Oh, man. Exactly. I think about that a lot. Like, what's the story here? And what was...
So I'm guessing because of that blended background, so to speak, like upbringing, like black history wasn't a prominent thing discussed.
Not necessarily.
Yeah.
Definitely my dad would to the best of his and my parents' ability, would always incorporate like black music and like what was available at the time about stories highlighting black children, like, you know, books. Like I really love whatever, like story books. And then I was older, like chapter books. And then, you know, I had Addie, the American Girl doll, you know what I mean?
Okay.
And then she was the only black one at the time. And so then we went to Philadelphia every summer. So then we would go to a lot of history museums and like definitely through family, like through relatives. We had, there were like.
It's okay if like it wasn't really taught, because like I know growing up for me, it wasn't really something that was touched on.
I don't I'm not
History
like I'm just actually thinking because I'm like, what do we do? I think it was just, hey, we're in Philadelphia for a month, and so we're gonna go to these museums that talk and address Black history. My dad's uncle, I mean, my uncle is my dad's brother. That's how that works. He like also had a lot of books or would share a lot of kind of culturally black TV that was in its prime in the early 90s or mid 90s. Anyway. So then years later, I went to graduate school in DC for public history, which is like museum stuff. Okay.
Yeah.
And I was in DC and I had gone to college in Hawaii, which doesn't really, like the joke there is that all the black people in Hawaii live in the barracks, like they're for military reasons. Obviously there's black Americans living on the islands of Hawaii,
Obama's
but
from there.
not that many. Or like my school, like I was just Obama, exactly. But look at Obama. I know the school that Obama went to, high school, and I have friends that I, like for example, really like 2 friends of mine from being a girl in Japan went to high school at the same school that Obama went to, and it's just not many black people. It's like,
of course, yeah.
I
mean, that's the thing is like, I think there is, especially like, you know, an American climates and stuff, it's like if black people are just surrounded by black people, like they unfortunately have a harder time navigating like, you know, that ascension through like careers and stuff like that. And so I completely can see Obama like thriving in a predominantly white area, and that's how he got.
I think exactly. That's like how he figured out how to maneuver different audiences, right? To ascend.
That's what I learned. Like growing up in Michigan, I was like in the suburbs.
Oh,
I'm like, I know how to. I know when someone's being an asshole or when someone's being ignorant. Yes. That doesn't make it all right, but I can kind of like suss out intent.
Yes, you can like play different cards or something.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's where Obama was able to finagle some of that. He's able to make people feel safe. I think that it's understandable, like given like you're ping ponging back and forth and everything like that, that it wouldn't be a natural thing to bring up. Just because you have so many other things going on.
So then very explicitly, so my point about DC and going to graduate school there, and I was studying history. I was studying early American history. My class, a lot of my coursework was on like the colonial period, but I was working through graduate school and for years after at a Civil War museum that was like it was like a place where Abraham Lincoln spent time writing. Basically, it was like a house that's what was then the country, but it's within DC proper. And anyway, it's where his family went for the summer. So then like I hadn't really grown up with any kind of like radical black immersion, I guess. Mm-hmm. Right. And so then a few things were happening. One is that I was in graduate school, one of the two black people in my whole cohort. I was in DC, which as a gentrifying chocolate city has a lot going on. And then also I was working at a Civil War museum and studying like slavery, and I freaked out. Yeah. I was like, I kind of like had a big, I don't know how to explain, like a bubble popped, and I got really like militant in like for my first year or my second year of graduate school, and my dad had this reaction to it. But the thing is, my dad is 72, so he grew up in the civil rights era in Philadelphia. He did, speaking of all this stuff, like he did a lot of work he like tested into a really high achieving high school. This was like in the 60s, and then he or early 70s, and then he he went to college, he dropped out, he went to art school, he like met somebody, he went to Japan. So my dad has worked so much to like, I don't know, build himself up or out or whatever. I think he's still navigating all of that stuff. So he said to me on the phone, he didn't like how I was focusing so much on race, and he said, we didn't raise you and my sister to something like, what did he say? He said, we didn't raise you to have to like to have to think about this.
Like for that to be like a big part of your identity or existence.
And then meanwhile, my sister is 4 years younger than me. So when I was in graduate school, she was in college, and she went to college in Savannah, Georgia. So she was in the South, and this was during Obama's first presidential, second presidential.
Okay.
So there was built up anti-Obama hate, and she was in the South. Anyway, both of us at the same time, we were like, oh, this is what it means to be black in America, and we just weren't really raised with that. So that's so then when I was then in terms of my explicit historical relationship, like experiences of Black history, when I was in grad school, I was working in this Lincoln Museum. I did a lot of work actually on whiteness and like men that were conducting trade and commerce in the Atlantic world, like colonial Philadelphia, colonial cities on the East Coast, and how they then like navigated their worlds in relationship to enslaved people that were there, or like kind of made or like created whiteness in opposition to that. And so through that foil, I'm pretty fascinated by the Black experience in America, like the American colonial period, but also worked at the Civil War Museum. So those are like, without going too far into any route, that's kind of like how I'm where I am.
I appreciate you sharing that. I think in a way I feel like a kindred spirit, because I kind of went through something similar in high school, because my family never really talked about race, like, or politics, but I knew that they were Republicans, but I wasn't given like the ability to kind of question that. You know what I mean? And so in high school, I started reading the Boondocks by Aaron McGruder.
Oh yeah.
And I got very, very militant. I started watching like all black shit. Right. But I'm surrounded by white kids, so I'm like, I'm nowhere. I'm like this like black Panther-esque kid, like wearing khakis and like looking like Black Doug. But I'm like, but taking down the man, and people were confused. And my mom was really confused. I could tell she was concerned, but she didn't talk to me about it.
Right.
And so I'm just eventually I kind of like just calmed down a little bit and just realized like I can't fight everybody I'm surrounded by. Like, let me figure out what I actually want out of this. Like, it's great to be proud and Black, but like, how I also make sure that this is like a healthy, productive way of living, carrying myself.
So real.
And it's tough because when you have family that doesn't talk about it, and maybe you feel like in between with the culture and like where you fit in. And it's before like Donald Glover, Travis Scott, or like Michael B. Jordan. You know what I mean? Like,
Yes.
This is a weird time, especially as a Black guy. Like, and I'm sure as a Black woman, it's like crazy, like trying to navigate that.
And that I this is the way you frame that is really interesting because there was like a come down. Okay, because basically, like there was like because 2016 I feel like is when Black Lives Matter protests. How old is Black Lives Matter? 2016?
Yeah, that's when
I think so. Because that's right. And I was in DC, so I participated in those. And at the time, my dad was really cynical because he's of this like kind of ilk that's like, well, how is that serving? How is like this protest, or how is being like, I don't know. He had a hard time with it, or understanding what the motives of Black Lives Matter were. I think that shifted a bit for him in 2020 after George Floyd, but he was still initially cynical because he just comes from this. It reminded me of, he comes in an older generation, right? So it reminded me of like The Butler, which is what's that movie?
Yeah, with Forrest Whitaker.
Right,
yeah.
And which I saw with my family actually. But anyway, you know how it's like the way the movie tries to portray like different generations, like he's of this tradition of like, well, to move forward and to be respected, you have to kind of align yourself with how the white people, or whatever that means, with how you should speak, how you should dress, how like what music you listen to. So my dad's like you know how Cosby like put all that stuff aside, it was like a pull up your pants, like speak well thing, right? I feel like that was Cosby in the Huxtable era. Like that's what my dad I think comes from.
I absolutely understand that.
Yeah.
That's like, that was my family.
But he's been through so much more trauma than I can even imagine.
Well, I think that's what helps. Like that's what they use to kind of not protect,
yes,
but like
it's that protect.
Yeah, like protect that trauma. Like protect themselves from reliving that trauma. It's like if I get my family to behave this way and we behave this way, then that'll protect us from that ever happening again, or whatever it was.
And I think my parents were like, we're raising two strong girls in Japan. It doesn't have to be they're two strong Black girls. They're just people in society, and this is how we want them to move forward. And then but they didn't prep us for like experiencing Blackness in our own ways when we were a bit older.
That's what's so interesting about this topic you picked for today, which is Thomas Downing, who's the gentleman behind us. I've been wanting to talk about Thomas Downing for a long time because, one, he's a businessman you don't hear about. I've never heard of the Oyster King of New York before.
No,
never heard of it. He was one of the wealthiest men in New York upon his death in like the mid 1800s, and he established like fine dining for like seafood, oysters particularly, and all while funding part of the Underground Railroad. And I never heard his name before.
Right.
And it's just like, how did he navigate all of that?
And his parents were enslaved.
They were enslaved. Sorry.
Wait, can I have more wine?
Yes. I have more.
Should I hop up? Oh, thank you.
I gotta just reach the bottle. There we go.
His parents were enslaved, and if I remember, in Virginia, like Chesapeake Bay, like somewhere in Virginia. So, and then what the hell? So he was born in the late 1800s.
He was born in the late 1700s.
Late 1700s,
and so his parents, like they were enslaved, but then their slaver, who was a Methodist.
Oh yeah, he was like,
you're
my
not
church is against
you're not supposed to own slaves, so he let them free.
Which is really interesting because I wonder, when I read that, it made me think about like, okay, so I'm really interested, for example, in like the history of Quakers, and like obviously notoriously white Quakers many of them were abolitionists. And I think that was like our faith tells us that, whatever, this is how to be a good neighbor to society. So you hear about people abandoning the system of slavery. What's the word I'm thinking of? Like holding or like holding people as property in relationship to their faith or whatever. But I don't know. It usually feels sort of like, oh, well, you know, the wars were starting, and then also it was like not economically viable to have slaves anymore anyway. But this is interesting that he just kind of decided that it was against his religion.
Yeah, and it's interesting too because, well, Thomas's family, they inherited that guy's name, Downing, but then he also he hired them to like take care of his estate, like, you know, like and stuff like that. So it was like weird. They started getting paid for the labor they were probably doing. And that allowed them to be able to like pay for Thomas's like education and like.
So I taught when I was in DC. When I was in graduate school, I was a substitute teacher at Sidwell Friends School, which is where the Obama girls went. It's a Quaker school, right? And so then, anyway, Baratunde Thurston, the like writer, right? So and he had that book, How to Be Black, and I remember reading it, and I remember him talking about he went to Sidwell in whatever decade, 80s or 90s, or maybe that's too early, but anyway, when he was a kid, he went to Sidwell Friends School, where then years later I was like a substitute teaching like fourth graders. And anyway, he was in the book talks about how he went to Sidwell in the day, but then on the weekends, like some Chinese American families take their kid to Chinese school or Japanese school even, which I did in high school. On Saturdays, like his mom brought him to like a Pan-African kind of like Black cultural school, like where you learn about Black history and talk about feeling connected to ancestors and all that. And so he was raised as like, you are Baratunde and you are Black or something. You know, I just thought that was interesting. It's not how I grew up.
But it's tough because depending on where you end up having, like, you know, deciding to like have your adulthood and like, you know, what kind of environment that can really warp you. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, I feel like if I hadn't left Michigan and come to a big metro city, like I wanted to come to New York, LA, or Chicago. I was like, I got to get the fuck out of here. And I think if I hadn't come to New York, I would be a completely different person. I'd probably have a completely different view. If I had stayed in Michigan, I would have a completely different viewpoint of like race,
so interesting,
and economics, like class.
And where in Michigan is your family?
Ann Arbor.
Ann Arbor, which I've never been to Michigan, but I understand Detroit, and then Ann Arbor feels like a different world.
It's ironic because my mom's family grew up in Detroit.
Oh, okay.
But they were the wealthier family members on my grandmother's side, and so a lot of people came to them for support and like things like that. And I think that kind of warped their like, you're not doing everything you can to get yourself, like, you know, pull yourself up by your own bootstraps. They were that kind of. It was that kind of.
Yes, totally.
It's wild, but
speaking of bootstraps, but he really did. Self-made man. No?
Well, the family was very fortunate because of time. I think with Downing setting them free, them being able to work on his estate, get some money, and that allowed them to be able to provide him a good education. They then got into like doing like, you know, working with oysters and seafood and things like that, and that's how Thomas got into the trade. I think all this stuff just ended up. He became like an outlier when it came to oysters. You know what I mean? Like he got his 10,000 hours, like learning about this shit. That's why, like when it's a huge market in New York City when he finally gets there. Like a lot of Black people have like oyster cellars or whatever, but he's like, I'm gonna go out like after midnight, purposely go look for like the best like script captains or whatever. Make sure I'm picking the best oysters. And I'm also gonna help them out by like bartering, but like I'm not gonna actually bid, but I'm gonna make sure they get paid. So then they all like me. Like he was
like a oyster kingpin. Like he knew business.
He legit. It's and that's why I think we don't hear about him because oysters aren't sexy. Like oysters. I like them, but they're gross.
Wait,
I understand.
Also, I have two thoughts right now.
Yeah.
One is that I think that oysters. It's funny you said I'm obsessed. Not to you. I hate Gen Z language. I was about to say I'm obsessed with the fact that you said oysters aren't sexy. Okay, so this makes me think of several things. One is that totally agree with you because they're like kind of difficult and gross, and I don't crave oysters. I like them too. I like them with a nice white wine and lemon or whatever, but I don't crave them. But actually, oysters are considered to be an aphrodisiac.
Yes.
And so in some light, they are supposed to be sexy, but whatever that is also isn't culturally black. Like, I feel like when I think of who's getting oysters, it's like, I don't know. I think of like 50-year-old white businessmen at 6 p.m. going to some kind of boring new American fare restaurant, and they're getting it.
Well, that was his clientele, and that's where it gets interesting with Thomas. Like, I think we should maybe back up a little bit before he got to the restaurant and everything, just to give people some context. So he had a good education in Virginia. He went to the war, I think in 1818 or something like that. And then he got discharged, and he married his wife, and they were in Philadelphia.
He had a bunch of kids.
Yeah, they were in Philadelphia. And then he was like learning how to shuck oysters and all that stuff. And then he moved to New York and was selling oysters on the street. And he used that money to eventually open up Thomas Downing's oyster house. That's like a oyster jar,
amazing.
Maybe? I don't know.
Yeah, what do you think this is? Do you think this it's like an urn of some
I don't know if I would want to get oysters out of that thing.
Inside of a ceramic ceramic I don't know, like a cavern. But okay. Okay, this is such a cool. Also, okay, when I think about the history of black entrepreneurs in seafood, or when I think of seafood in relationship to black cuisine, like I think of the South, I guess,
and particularly it's not, New Orleans, right?
Yes, of course.
Yep.
I don't think that much of like black entrepreneurs and maybe the Mid Atlantic, which is why this. His New York, the New York of all of this, the New York of it all really stands out to me.
Yeah.
And it reminds me, okay, so I'm forgetting the first name of this woman. There was a historian whose book we had to read in graduate school, and then I later, quick aside, when I first moved to New York, I was hired, my only job was that I was a part-time living historian at the New York Historical Society for a Jim Crow exhibition called Black Citizenship in the Age of Jim Crow. So I had to like dress up as different people that were doing, I'll get to my point about oysters. So different people that were doing like, people that were living in New York essentially in the early 20th century and late 19th century, like in the heart of Jim Crow. How did people attain black citizenship, or informally or informally? And that was my job when I moved here, which was kind of funny because it was such an intense experience. So we would, incorporate like museum visitors in some kind of hands-on learning thing. And part of that also was my grandmother, the one in Philadelphia, who's now passed away. She was a member of the 888 Corps, which was an all-black women battalion during World War II. So she was like stationed in London and France. Wow. And so then by chance, anyway, at this New York Historical Society job, I had to dress up as that, like a woman from that, and talk about how people started mail. So anyway, when I was in this job, I met by coincidence the parents of a young historian whose book I read in graduate school. And the book that she published is called Dangerous Economies. And her last name is Zubin or Zabin. And the whole idea behind Dangerous Economies is exploring 1700s and 1800s New York City trade and commerce and how people sold shit. It's like women finding power through selling fruit, black people finding capital through like selling. So anyway, this book really came to mind because he's part of this tapestry of like entrepreneurs in 18th and 19th century New York City. As a port city, there was so much traffic happening, and he was not enslaved, and so was finding his own way in the market. Yeah.
It's that's just so fascinating about it. And like, unfortunately, there's not that much context about what his relationship. He obviously had to be, I don't want to say revered, but accepted by the black community in New York City because he was part of the abolitionist groups. He was very much like an activist. Like, obviously, he started like, he made his restaurant a stop on the Underground Railroad. Like, he helped, take care of slaves that were trying to get to freedom, like in between, I guess, meal sessions and shit. Like, or,
That's fascinating.
But it's like, but then he had to still be charming enough and know how to read a room and navigate the white world to have a predominantly white male clientele who were like, at Wall Street and working at the commerce and stuff like that, and who felt comfortable enough to bring their wives and kids, because apparently that was taboo back in the day. Like, women didn't go dining at this time.
Oh, right. Okay,
which is wild. Like, at the Oyster House when he created the restaurant. And so how did he navigate those two worlds? Like, it's almost like he was an actor. Like, I want to know, was he genuinely able to just navigate these worlds because he was raised with the Downing family in Virginia?
Oh, that's
and like
so
he was educated by like predominantly white people, or is it like he's just always been like duplicitous and been able to navigate those two different worlds?
I mean, I feel like it's probably a combination.
Yeah.
I think because he was sort of like, oh my god, this wine is getting to me. Okay, so this the word I'm thinking of is
code switching.
Huh?
Code switching.
I thought of code switching earlier, actually, when you were talking about something. Certainly code switching.
Okay.
And rendering. Fuck. There's like a word I'm thinking about, like growing up.
Yeah.
Rendering?
Do you think, though, he would be considered a sellout?
No. No. I break the microphone. I don't think he's a sellout for so many reasons.
I'm just wondering if people would, like, do you think people might have interpreted, like, some black people might have interpreted him as a sellout?
Okay, there's like a few ideas swirling in my head. And one is like, I mean, to be born of parents who were held as commodities, even by a relatively, like, Downing, whoever the Methodist guy was that freed his parents, right? Like, I don't know. There's this whole conversation about urban enslaved people versus enslaved folks who are working at the big house, like in the South, like domestic, or the experiences of black people who were like working, held as slaves in urban cities in the Mid-Atlantic. In theory, they had more agency because they got to like kind of build out a life for themselves, right? Yeah. My point is that regardless, whatever this dude's deal was, Thomas Downing, is that the man's name?
Yep.
The one that.
Oh, it's talking about the
not our friend.
Oh,
not
it's talking
our
about
king.
the gentleman that freed him.
But Downing was his last name. So
yeah, Downing was his last name, but I don't remember that.
You know that, like, what's the word?
That slave man's name.
What's that in the roots? like I'm not Toby. Never. Okay,
what's
so
your name?
I forgot. So anyway, that guy. Fuck. Okay, that guy. I'm losing my train of thought, but I had a really big
it's the wine.
feeling.
It's the Sauvignon Blanc.
It's the wine. I guess it's the object of this show. Okay, so, well, somebody like Thomas Downing, who was the children of people who were held as commodity, to then, and therefore his parents were people that belong to the sense of marketplace. And there's actually, this is stuff from graduate school, there's books on how the marketplace as like a space and an experience in terms of the later years of American slavery in the cities, like all the dynamics that played out in the marketplace, like the auction block. Yeah. Like to be the child of people who were enslaved as parts of the marketplace, but then on his own accord, figure out how to become a businessman and navigate this system and overcome it to such an impressive degree. I don't think that makes him a sellout. I think that makes him, it's kind of, there's like beautiful poetry there.
Yeah. I'm just trying to get, I'm just curious, like I'm fascinated because I'm curious about his dynamic, like where he fit in society, how people perceived him. And that's like me maybe like projecting onto Thomas, like trying to understand how he was able to do this. And, I think it's kind of the American dream, right? Which is that, like you said, his family went from being commodities where they were auctioned,
right?
And so to now he's like in his weird niche market, like auctioning like oysters and stuff. But that's like what's not only taking care of his family, but giving him such a wealth of amount of wealth that
he
he's
was
able
making white consumers his bitch by.
But do you think they knew? Obviously Underground Railroad, like
they don't
know if they were funding like his efforts in that, but he was a very public abolitionist, like, right? And so he is actively trying to make sure that like white people like aren't trying to capture free men, take them back down south, because that was a big thing. 12 Years a Slave touched on that a little bit.
Yeah.
And so it's
yeah, that's so
it's like
dark.
if he's publicly like doing that, but he still has all these white clients, like the oysters and the food that he served must have been so good with the roasted duck with oysters and like the various dishes he had. It must have been so good that he was undeniable. Like, you just don't fuck with Thomas, right? Like,
right. And I feel like also what's so okay. And so then even just like the practice of learning shucking oysters, it reminds me of
so
like
crazy.
It's crazy.
Have you ever done it? Have you ever shucked an oyster?
No, and
it's
I feel like I would cut
hard.
my hand off.
It's terrifying because they use like sharp
right.
a sharp knife to do it. And when I was in New Orleans, one of my I was drunk off. I was just and I saw this brother like shucking oysters. I was like, hey, my man, can I try one? He's like, I really shouldn't do it. I was like, come on, man, come on. And he let me. I almost sliced my hand. Yeah, it was bad because it was just so rough, and he's trying to teach me, like he's trying to tell me what to do. I'm hammered. I had a few hurricanes and shit, but
what's in a hurricane?
Well, it's like that big mixed
like a
drink.
cocktail. Oh, the ones that they
crazy
kind of
cocktail.
sell. I've only been to New Orleans.
It's
once,
literally
but
that. It's like a Long Island iced tea, but like in the Cajun, and so but a bayou, and so so I'm doing that, and I'm like, he has to do the like hundreds, if not thousands, of these a day. You know what I mean? Depending on how busy it is.
And he had to learn, therefore, precision and like best technique, and probably figure out not only like how to use the best tools, best knives, but then also regularly sharpen them and like find the resources for this. And it's just,
you gotta make sure everything's preserved well.
Foods too, but that is wild because okay, wait, can I just put a pin in that?
Yes.
So also, really briefly, how there are fruit and vegetable, animal, mineral, whatever that we have as humans today in contemporary in 2024, where it's like, how did people even figure out how to eat this or cook it or consume it, or like a coconut? I mean, stuff like that is obvious because it falls out of a tree and then I guess it broke. Or
but it's not natural to like see this hairy brown thing and be like, I'm gonna cut it open and see what's inside. Yeah.
Well, so then an oyster has such a hard like calcium. I don't know what oyster shell is made. I'm not a biologist, but anyway,
we're getting deep in the weeds now.
But anyway, obviously for at least a millennia, people had been eating oysters. It's really fascinating that in this really prime moment that also coincided like the rise of like, this is also his lifespan spans the rise of modern capitalism in a real way. Like this is when port cities in Northern America were taking in and sending out all of these imports and exports,
like thriving.
And
he had a great location by Broad Street. Like he was in the financial district. Timing worked out great for him.
I want to go.
It's insane. Like what's
it called? The 5
points, right?
5 points.
Yeah.
Which I was not familiar with until learning about him a little bit.
Yeah, and it's like a neighborhood because there was a lot of black people that were in the oyster business. They had oyster sellers and stuff like that because it was considered like a low commodity, like food source, right? Like
that makes sense.
And like, there's an abundance of it, but it wasn't high quality, and so that's where he was able to use his knowledge from
and find high quality.
Yeah, being in Virginia,
slimy guys.
Yeah, he was able to know like which ones are going to be like just salty enough, I guess.
Yeah,
and
the right brine.
Like his oysters were so like he was sending that shit to Queen Victoria in England and stuff. Like didn't she send him a gold chromatic watch or something like that? It's like a family heirloom.
That's really interesting.
It's like insane. Like how we not know about this guy?
Yeah, I'm actually like there needs to be an exploration of him more, like, you know what I mean?
I'm working on it.
You are? Like, please do.
Because I knew about Thomas before you chose this as a topic, and now like I actually get to talk about it on the podcast, and it's incredibly exciting because to do all this in the early to mid 1800s is incredible. Like it's just, and the fact that, I mean, I'm sure there were several attempts on his life, maybe, or like, there was threats to the business to burn it down and stuff.
And wasn't he? Wait a minute. Yes, and I'm jumping ahead for a second.
Yeah.
He was denied something. He was denied
citizenship.
citizenship.
Yeah. He got it,
and then died right before
the Civil Rights Act.
Civil Rights Act.
It was 1860 something. He died the day before.
I believe the Civil Rights. Don't come at me if I'm wrong. I believe the Civil Rights Act 1865 because it 4 or 5. Anyway, it was towards the end of the Civil War. And
it was either the day before or the day after he died that it passed.
I think it was after. He died before.
Yeah.
And it's so wild to directly contribute to like the GDP of which was in his lifetime no longer a conglomerate of British colonies. In his lifetime was a new nation. As an American, he never
did he have to pay taxes? If he wasn't a citizen?
Do you think he had to pay taxes? Maybe he
That's crazy.
Maybe he didn't have.
He probably had to.
I don't know.
If he was on
tariffs?
Oh wait, no, because if he had friends in high places and they were all in finance, he probably got a little.
I'm saying maybe that's how he won.
He had to kick back to somebody, whether it was, there was somebody he was paid off, for sure.
Yeah,
especially for
you're
protection.
Right. That's got to be
at that time, like. And to be able to like get safe passage for like, because there's no way that like the cops didn't know about the underground rail. That's what I'm curious about. Is like, did people know or suspect, and then how did he deal with that? But obviously, that's not the story that's told often, like when his name comes up. But I'm sure he had like so much stress and anxiety. Like I feel like me just thinking about him in that position, having a fine dining restaurant, having to find the best oysters in the land, having to raise kids because his son was also heavily into the movement and everything like that. And his son also kind of probably fucked up the business.
Oh, I'm sure.
Because you peeped that the restaurants closed after the son took over and he passed away, right?
Even this depiction, I don't know what the story behind this specific image is, but it's really fascinating because there is a lot of turbulence and turmoil, even in the movement of this like lithograph or whatever.
These little.
Is. Yeah.
Folks, if you're listening, we're looking at an image of black fishermen that are like sourcing through oysters on a little fisher boat. It's terrifying because the waves look very angry. It looks like rough.
Also, I'm all hopped up on the idea of like he was not so removed at all from people who were subject to the Middle Passage, but then he made the Atlantic Ocean his real source of income and empowerment.
He wasn't afraid of water because that shit back then was terrifying.
Terrifying for so many reasons.
Yeah. I'm fascinated by like all trades on like the water back like between like the dawn of America, just because do you know about whaling? Like I don't want to go too far down that rabbit hole, but we'll talk off camera. I'll tell you all about whaling. But that shit is terrifying but also fascinating.
And I love the shit, or like cod in where now is like upper New England or like into Canada. And I just feel like the ocean was the source of America becoming itself.
If you can, because seafood is like notorious in like the culinary world. It's like it's very affordable.
Because it's very
affordable, especially if you can like profit off the bottom, like of the tier in regards to like the bottom feeder fish and things like that. And so for him to kind of tap in to be like, this is my specialty, I'm gonna revolve everything around oysters. And eventually that trend did like fall apart, and that's probably why the restaurant ended up folding I'm sure for various other reasons too. But I think he was able to really hit a moment in history where it was like, I have this rich clientele that's around here. They have disposable income. I got good food. And I'm charming enough, at least, where people don't want to fuck with me.
Yeah, clearly he was charming. Clearly he had something. Social savvy.
Yeah, because he expanded too. He had multiple locations, and he had catering business that was hired to do the catering for what was called the most brilliant affair, an event of the century for Charles Dickens in the city, like celebrating him. It's like he was the man for a little bit. He was killing it, and it breaks my heart a little bit that we don't know about people like him. And I get it's the 1800s, like things have drastically changed, but for him to do this kind of stuff in that time, even in New York, which isn't as liberal as everyone thinks it is,
right?
Especially back then in the 1800s, like
of course,
there's still a lot of
even though
racism
people sometimes will blob the like a city like New York City into an abolitionist framework, because it was not the North necessarily, but culturally the North, right? Yeah. Yankees. Honestly, it doesn't mean that people were not racist. Mm-hmm. That remains the case today. But the point is that but through, before, and after the Civil War and through Reconstruction, obviously people that were living in New York City still they could have had a sort of like a pro-Confederate sensibility. Yeah. Sorry to cackle in the face of pain, but we both made sense. We both like kind of looked at the clock.
I guess to wrap this up, what would you say is the most important detail about Thomas Downing's history that people should know?
I'm really impressed by how he fine-tuned a skill, like a craftsmanship in terms of I don't know, shucking, but then also had this really broad and sophisticated and savvy business sense to then expand it and create like a whole, like a restaurant and a system and his own system for finding the best product and selling it. I think he really, I don't know. And for me, just again, the idea that this is the tragedy of Black experiences in America, is that it's connected to, or not all, but American Black experiences is connected to the Atlantic Ocean. It just is. So he found his way to like maneuver that into his own livelihood. Yeah. That's important.
It's fascinating. And for me, like, that's why I'm so happy that you picked him as a topic, because, between just chefs that we see, like whether on TV or film, they're always white guys. Yeah. Always just, thinking outside the box and doing it. It's like, oh, cool. And then and even when it comes to Black people in culinary, like when I think about film specifically, like I know, especially in seafood, who's the main dude that comes out? Bubba from Forrest Gump. Right. Right. But imagine someone who actually was able to capitalize on that knowledge and make a business out of it. Right. Versus Forrest Gump, this white guy doing it. And
yes, of course.
It's just
and also to shed light on the Northeastern Black chef and like entrepreneurial experience is really cool and different.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like the bear and stuff is really popular. Yeah, there's a show to be made about.
He deserves his real treatment.
I don't want to say the idea I have in my mind because
I'm going to ask you off the record. So guess what, listeners and readers at home? Stay tuned. Just figuratively.
I mean, I guess this is transcribed in a way on some of the apps. AI is crazy.
I just mean like emotionally, an emotional reader.
Okay. Brittany Carney. Please tell the people how they can follow you and what you have going on. I know you have a special on YouTube.
Follow me on my Instagram, which is brittany.goblin.carney.
It's so funny. Her page is just some of the craziest shit. I love it. You just posted a golem with a thick booty today on your story. It's wild, Brittany.
They should not sleep on Gollum's little booty and slim thick bod. Anyway, also my special is now out on YouTube. YouTube.com, which you can access for free.
What's it called?
It is called That Is My Horse. That is my horse. That is my horse. I filmed it in Raleigh, North Carolina. Also, home of a lot of oysters, but we don't have time to get into that. Raleigh, North Carolina. That is my horse on YouTube. Please look at my special. It's only 33 minutes and 22 seconds. I love you. Thank you so much.
Please check it out. Check out everything that Brittany does. She's hilarious and so funny. I just said that twice. Yeah, we've been drinking some Sauvignon Blanc. It's been a good time. We've had a good.
Wine is wild.
Yeah, like I haven't drank in like a few days, so I've been like, I'm out of it now. Yeah. But I appreciate you so much, Brittany, for coming through.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate you.
As always, you can follow me at Frodo_Blackens on all the social media platforms. You can follow the show at Official Drunk Black History on all those same platforms. Be sure to go to youtube.com/drunkblackhistory. Push that subscribe button. Special thanks as always to LV Pro Film House for letting us use their space. And we will talk to y'all next month. Thank you.